The weight of fear, the transport shuttle. Meridian cut through the crimson atmosphere of Kepler 442b like a knife through blood. Dr. Lyra Chen pressed her palm against the reinforced viewport, watching the alien landscape unfold below. Jagged, obsidian spires that seemed to claw at the sky, vast crystalline formations that pulsed with an inner light, and somewhere in that hostile beauty the Varak waited. "You sure about this, Doc?" Captain Rodriguez's voice carried the weight of a man who'd lost too many friends to these creatures. His weathered hands gripped the shuttle controls with white-knuckled intensity. "We've got enough firepower in orbit to glass half this continent. Maybe that's the better play?" Lyra turned from the window, her dark eyes reflecting the same determination that had carried her through xenobiology, training on Luna, through the grief of losing her research team on Proxima Station, through the nightmare testimonies of survivors from 12 different worlds. "Fear has been our only strategy for 7 years, Marcus. Look where it's gotten us." Behind them, General Harrison shifted in his crash harness, his cybernetic implants whirring softly as he processed tactical data. "The Varak have killed 40,000 colonists across the outer rim. Their nesting grounds are forbidden territory, sacred to them. We send you in there. They might see it as the ultimate provocation, or the ultimate gesture of trust," Lyra countered, checking her minimal equipment one final time. "No weapons. No heavy sensors, just basic recording devices and her xenobiologist's instincts. Everything we know about them comes from combat encounters. We've never tried to understand them." The shuttle shuddered as they entered the planet's lower atmosphere. Through the viewports, the landscape became more defined, rolling hills of purple vegetation, streams of liquid mercury threading between ancient stone formations, and there, rising from the center of it all, like a dark monument to alien intelligence, the cube. The Varak nesting structure defied human understanding of architecture. 6 kilometers on each side, it appeared to be carved from a single piece of black material that seemed to absorb light itself. No visible entrances, no apparent seams, just smooth surfaces that occasionally rippled like disturbed water. Orbital. Scans suggested it extended deep underground, its roots reaching into the planet's core. "Thermal signatures show hundreds of life forms inside," reported Dr. Sarah Kim, the mission's xenoanthropologist, her voice tight with nervous energy. "Adults in the upper levels, cubs concentrated in the lower chambers. If your theory is right, Lyra, those cubs have never seen a human except through their parents' memories of war." The shuttle touched down 3 kilometers from the cube, in a clearing surrounded by crystalline trees that chimed softly in the alien wind. The moment the engines died, an oppressive silence fell over them. Even the planet's wildlife seemed to hold its breath. Lyra stood, shouldering her light pack. Through the viewports, she could see movement in the shadows of the cube, shapes that flickered at the edge of perception, watching, waiting. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "If I'm not back in 6 hours, leave without me. No rescue attempts, that's an order." "Like hell," Rodriguez muttered, but he knew as well as she did that this was humanity's last chance. 7 years of war had brought them to the brink of extinction. If compassion failed, where violence had succeeded only in breeding more violence, there might not be another opportunity. As the shuttle's airlock cycled open, alien air rushed in, thick, humid, carrying scents of ozone and something hauntingly familiar, like rain on summer stone. Lyra stepped onto the surface of an alien world, alone, carrying nothing but hope and the desperate prayer that love might prove stronger than fear. The sacred ground. The Varak cubs emerged from the shadows like living nightmares given form and curiosity. Lyra had been walking for 30 minutes across the sacred ground, a circular area of smooth, dark stone that surrounded the cube. Her boots made soft scraping sounds against the alien material, each step echoing faintly off the massive structure ahead. The air grew thicker as she approached, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle and her hair stand on end. The first cub appeared from behind a crystalline outcropping 50 meters to her left. It was smaller than she'd expected from the combat reports about the size of a large dog, but no less alien. Its body was covered in overlapping plates of chitin that shifted color from deep purple to silver as it moved. 6 legs carried it with fluid grace, while 4 arms ended in hands that could apparently serve as either delicate manipulators or devastating claws. Most striking were its eyes, 3 of them arranged in a triangle on its angular head, glowing with soft blue bioluminescence. Lyra forced herself to stop walking. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to call for extraction, to remember the footage from New Geneva, where creatures just like this one had torn through a colonial settlement in minutes. Instead, she slowly lowered herself to sit cross-legged on the stone, placing her equipment pack beside her. The cub tilted its head, a motion so remarkably like a curious puppy that Lyra felt tears prick her eyes. It took a tentative step forward, then another. Behind it, more shapes emerged from hiding places among the stone formations. Dozens of young Varak, all focused on this strange, soft creature that had entered their sacred space without aggression. "Hello," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. The word felt inadequate, almost ridiculous, but it was all she had. One of the approaching cubs, this one slightly larger with golden streaks through its chitinous armor, stopped and produced a sound like wind chimes mixed with static. Others joined in, creating a complex harmony that somehow conveyed questioning? Welcome? She couldn't be sure. Dr. Kim's voice crackled through her comm implant. "Lyra, we're reading massive bioelectric activity from inside the cube. Whatever you're doing, it's getting their attention." Lyra reached slowly for one of her instruments, not a scanner or weapon, but something far more revolutionary, a simple sketch pad and charcoal pencil. She'd spent months preparing for this moment, studying every scrap of intelligence about Varak behavior, but in the end, her strategy was elegantly simple. She would do what no human had ever done in the presence of these creatures. She would create. The cubs watched, transfixed, as she began to draw. Her subject was obvious. The young Varak directly in front of her, the one with golden streaks. Her hand moved across the paper, capturing the alien grace of its form, the way light played across its armored hide, the intelligent gleam in its 3 eyes. The golden-streaked cub crept closer. Others followed, forming a semicircle around her. Some were clearly juvenile, still small and unsteady on their multiple limbs. Others appeared nearly adult-sized, but retained the softer edges and brighter coloration of youth. All of them watched her work with an intensity that spoke of intelligence, far beyond what the military reports had suggested. "They're not just predators," Lyra breathed into her comm. "Look at how they're arranged. That's social behavior. They're learning from each other, communicating. Those sounds they're making, I think it might be language." As if responding to her words, the golden-streaked cub produced another series of harmonic tones. This time, the sounds were clearly directed at her, rising and falling in patterns that reminded Lyra of questions in human speech. She looked up from her drawing to meet its eyes, and for a moment, species and eons of evolution fell away. 2. Intelligent beings regarded each other with curiosity rather than fear. Slowly, carefully, Lyra tore the completed sketch from her pad and held it out. The cub stretched forward with one delicate hand and touched the paper. Its fingers, she could think of them as fingers now, traced the charcoal lines with obvious recognition and what might have been wonder. Then something extraordinary happened. The cub settled down onto the stone beside her, its armored bulk surprisingly graceful as it arranged itself in a posture that mirrored her own crossed-leg position. Others began to follow suit, until Lyra found herself at the center of a circle of young Varak, all of them watching her with bright, intelligent eyes. In the shuttle 3 kilometers away, Captain Rodriguez stared at his sensors in disbelief. "Sarah, are you seeing this? The cubs aren't just tolerating her presence, they're choosing to be near her." The language of trust time seemed suspended in the shadow of the cube. Lyra had lost track of how long she'd been sitting among the Varak cubs. Her chronometer read 2 hours, but it felt like minutes and eternities all at once. The young aliens had gradually moved closer, their initial circle tightening until some were near enough to touch. The breakthrough came when the smallest cub, barely the size of a house cat and still bearing the soft, almost fuzzy texture of a newborn, approached. Her outstretched hand, its 3 eyes were larger in proportion to its head than the others, giving it an almost comically curious expression. When it pressed its small head against her palm, Lyra felt something she hadn't experienced since her childhood on Earth, the simple, profound joy of connection with another living being. "Oh," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. "The cubs." Yitin was warm and surprisingly soft, with a texture like polished stone. It produced a sound like a contented sigh, and she felt its tiny chest rumble with something analogous to purring. More cubs pressed closer, drawn by this display of trust. Soon, Lyra found herself surrounded by warm, alien bodies. Some rested their heads on her legs, others curled up beside her like cats in a sunbeam. The golden-streaked cub she'd first drawn positioned itself as a protective barrier between her and the cube, as if understanding that she might feel vulnerable with her back to the massive structure. Through her comm, she could hear the excited chatter of the research team back at the shuttle. Dr. Kim's voice was breathless with discovery. "Lyra, the acoustic analysis of their vocalizations is incredible. There are harmonic layers we can barely detect. They're communicating on multiple frequency ranges simultaneously. It's not just language, it's like musical poetry." But Lyra was making discoveries of her own. As she sat in peaceful communion with the cubs, she began to notice patterns in their behavior that spoke of complex social structures. The older juveniles clearly held protective roles over the younger ones. When one small cub wandered too far from the group, a larger one would gently guide it back with soft touches and quiet harmonics. They shared food, strange crystalline fruits that appeared to be cultivated rather than foraged, and groomed each other with obvious affection. "They're not monsters," she said softly into her comm. "They're children. Children who've been taught that anything that looks like us is a threat to be eliminated." The weight of 7 years of war pressed down on her as she spoke. How many of these gentle creatures had humanity killed? How many cubs had been orphaned by their defensive actions? A new sound drew her attention, deeper, more complex harmonics coming from the direction of the cube. The cubs around her lifted their heads, their eyes focusing on something behind her. Lyra turned slowly, careful not to disturb the small ones resting against her, and saw adult Varak emerging from the structure. These were the creatures from the combat reports, massive, fully armored beings that moved with deadly grace. Each stood nearly 3 meters tall, their chitinous plates dark and scarred from battle, but there was something in their posture that wasn't aggression. They approached with careful, measured steps, their multiple arms held in positions that Lyra's xenobiology training suggested were non-threatening. The golden-streaked cub beside her produced a long, complex series of tones directed at the approaching adults. Other cubs joined in, creating a symphony of communication that seemed to tell a story. Lyra caught fragments of rhythm and melody that corresponded to her arrival, her peaceful behavior, her gift of art. One of the adult Varak, distinguished by silver markings across its carapace and a crown-like arrangement of spines, stepped forward from the group. This had to be a leader, possibly a parent to some of the cubs. It studied Lyra with intelligent eyes that held no trace of the killing fury described in military reports. Slowly, deliberately, the silver-marked Varak lowered itself into the same cross-legged position the cubs had adopted. The gesture was clearly intentional, an acknowledgement of her peaceful intent, perhaps even a sign of respect. Other adults followed suit, arranging themselves in a wider circle around the cubs and their human visitor. "My God," Dr. Kim's voice came through the comm, thick with emotion. "Lyra, what you're witnessing, this is unprecedented. They're treating you as a guest, not an intruder. The acoustic patterns suggest formal greetings, possibly even ceremonial welcome songs." But Lyra barely heard the commentary from the shuttle. She was lost in the profound realization that everything humanity thought it knew about the Varak was wrong. These weren't mindless killers or alien monsters. They were a sophisticated society with complex emotions, family structures, and cultural traditions. The attacks on human colonies hadn't been acts of senseless aggression, but desperate attempts to protect their young from what they perceived as an existential threat. As the adult Varak began to vocalize in low, beautiful harmonies, Lyra understood that she was witnessing something sacred, a ceremony of acceptance that might be the key to ending 7 years of tragic misunderstanding. The matriarch's judgment, the harmonies grew deeper, more complex, as shadows lengthened across the sacred ground. Lyra had been among the Varak for nearly 4 hours, and the gathering around her had swelled to include dozens of adults and cubs. They arranged themselves in concentric circles, with her at the center like the hub of some vast living wheel. The music, for she could no longer think of it as mere communication, told stories, through rising and falling tones, through rhythms that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the world itself. The Varak shared their history. Lyra didn't understand the words, but emotion transcended language. She heard tragedy in minor keys, loss in discordant passages, and underneath it all, a theme of fierce protectiveness that spoke of a people driven to extremes by love for their young. "Lyra?" Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through her comm, tight with tension. "Long-range sensors are picking up massive movement underground. Something big is coming up from the deep levels of the cube." The adult Varak had stopped their singing. They turned as one toward the base of the massive structure, their postures shifting into what Lyra recognized as positions of deep respect. Even the cubs fell silent, their bioluminescent eyes dimming as if in reverence. The ground began to vibrate with a low, thrumming pulse that seemed to emanate from the cube itself. Sections of the apparently seamless wall began to shift and flow, revealing an opening large enough for something truly massive to emerge. She appeared like a living mountain given form and consciousness. The matriarch of the Varak stood 4 meters tall and half again as wide, her ancient carapace bearing the scars of centuries and the deep wisdom of uncounted years. Unlike the others, her chitin had taken on the translucent quality of aged amber, and bioluminescent patterns flowed across her body like slow lightning. 6 arms, each as thick as Lyra's torso, moved with surprising delicacy as she emerged from her deep sanctum. But it was her eyes that held Lyra captivated, not 3 like the others, but 5, arranged in a star pattern across her broad head. They glowed with an inner fire that spoke of intelligence vast and ancient, of memories that stretched back to when her people first looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. The assembled Varak began a new song, one so deep and reverent that Lyra felt it in her bones. This was clearly a ceremonial greeting, perhaps performed only in the presence of their supreme leader. The matriarch listened to every note, her great head turning to observe the unprecedented gathering of her people around a single human. "General Harrison to Dr. Chen," came a new voice through her comm. "I've got 3 battle cruisers in orbit ready to extract you at my word." That thing could tear you apart without effort. But Lyra felt no fear as the matriarch approached. There was something in the ancient being's manner that spoke of careful judgment rather than impending violence. She moved with the measured pace of one accustomed to making decisions that would affect countless lives. The golden-streaked cub that had been Lyra's first contact rose from beside her and approached the matriarch with obvious familiarity. The tiny being, tiny compared to this mountain of living armor, produced a series of complex harmonics that seemed to tell the story of the last few hours. Other cubs joined in, their voices weaving together in what was clearly testimony about the strange human who had come in peace. The matriarch listened to every word, her 5 eyes never leaving Lyra's face. When the cubs finished their account, she stepped forward until she loomed directly over the seated human. Up close, Lyra could see the incredible detail of her ancient carapace, patterns worn by time, scars that told stories of battles fought to protect her people, and underneath it all, the slow pulse of alien life. Dr. Chen, Dr. Kim's voice was. Barely a whisper through the comm. According to our cultural analysis, what's happening now? This is a formal judgment. She's deciding whether you represent a threat to her people. The new dawn. The sun was setting over Kepler 442b, painting the alien sky in shades of violet and gold that no human eyes had ever seen in peace. Lyra sat in the growing twilight, surrounded by 3 generations of Varak, watching as the cubs played games that looked remarkably similar to tag and hide-and-seek among the crystalline formations. The matriarch had not moved from her position beside Lyra for the past hour. Occasionally, she would produce soft, questioning harmonics, and Lyra would respond with words that transcended the need for translation. They spoke of children, of protection, of the terrible weight of decisions made in fear. The ancient beings' 5 eyes held depths of sorrow that spoke of losses too great to measure, of strikes ordered against human colonies not from hatred, but from desperate love for her own people. "Captain Rodriguez to all personnel," came the voice through Lyra's. "Gumbi, I'm reading multiple Varak ships approaching from the outer system. They're not moving in attack formation. It looks almost like they're coming to witness something." Dr. Kim's voice joined the conversation, thick with excitement and exhaustion. "The acoustic analysis is complete, Lyra. Their language, it's incredible. Each individual can produce sounds across 17 different harmonic ranges simultaneously. A single Varak can conduct an entire symphony with their voice. No wonder we never understood their attempts at communication." But Lyra was focused on a smaller miracle playing out before her. The smallest cub, the one that had first approached her hand, was attempting to show her something. It produced a series of simple, single-note sounds while pointing toward the sky with one delicate finger. Following its gaze, Lyra saw the first of many Varak vessels descending through the atmosphere, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with the same patterns she'd observed on the matriarch's carapace. "They're coming to see," she said softly into her comm. "Word is spreading that contact has been made. Peaceful contact." The golden-streaked cub that had been her first friend approached carrying something in its 4 hands, a piece of the same dark material that composed the cube, but shaped into a flat tablet. Etched into its surface with incredible precision was an image. Lyra, surrounded by Varak cubs, all of them arranged in the peaceful circle that had marked this historic day. "A gift," she whispered, accepting the tablet with trembling hands. "They made this for me." The matriarch produced a complex harmony that Dr. Kim later translated as something close to, "So that all may remember the day the warriors learned to put down their weapons." The ancient being gestured toward the descending ships, then back to Lyra, making it clear that this moment would be shared with all Varak across the galaxy. As the first ship touched down at the edge of the sacred ground, Lyra felt the weight of history settling around her. 7 years of war, countless lives lost on both sides, entire worlds turned into battlegrounds, all because two species had met with fear instead of curiosity, with weapons instead of open hands. "General Harrison to Dr. Chen," came the gruff voice of the military commander. "I've got diplomatic teams preparing for immediate departure from Earth. What do I tell them about negotiation terms?" Lyra looked around at the cubs playing in the alien twilight, at the adults who had chosen to trust rather than attack, at the matriarch whose ancient wisdom had recognized the possibility for peace. "Tell them to bring children," she said. "Tell them to bring artists and musicians and storytellers. Tell them that the universe just became a much larger, more beautiful place." The smallest cub climbed into her lap, settling there with complete trust as more Varrock ships filled the sky. Their bioluminescent hulls pulsed in synchronized patterns that painted the gathering darkness with living light, a celebration visible from orbit, a beacon of hope that would shine across the galaxy. In the days that followed, xenobiologists would study the complex social structures of Varrock society. Linguists would spend years unraveling the magnificent complexity of their musical language. Historians would mark this as the moment when humanity truly joined the galactic community, not as conquerors, but as neighbors. But for Lyra, sitting in that circle of alien children as night fell over a sacred world, the moment was simpler and more profound. For the first time in 7 years, the universe was quiet. The sounds of war had been replaced by the gentle harmonies of young voices, learning that the galaxy was full of friends they had simply never met. And in that circle of trust, under alien stars, two species began to dream of a future written, not in the language of fear, but in the universal tongue of compassion. Characters and their locations. Dr. Lyra Chen, our protagonist, a xenobiologist in her early 30s with shoulder-length black hair and determined dark eyes. She stands at the center of a circle of crystalline formations on the sacred ground surrounding the Varrock cube, much like a researcher in a field station surrounded by the natural beauty of a place like Yellowstone National Park or the Sahara Desert, a place where ancient forces have shaped the landscape into something both beautiful and otherworldly. Captain Marcus Rodriguez, a weathered space transport pilot in his 40s, with graying temples and the steady hands of someone who's navigated countless dangerous missions. He remains in the shuttle Meridian, positioned in a clearing 3 kilometers from the cube, like a park ranger waiting at a trailhead, while a researcher ventures into untouched wilderness. General Harrison, a military commander in his 50s, with cybernetic implants, initially positioned in the shuttle but later coordinating from orbital command. His role is similar to a mission director at NASA's Johnson Space Center, overseeing operations from a control room filled with monitors and communication equipment. Dr. Sarah Kim, a xenoanthropologist in her 30s with keen analytical skills, stationed in the shuttle's research bay, surrounded by acoustic analysis equipment and cultural databases. Her setup resembles a linguistics laboratory at a major university, with multiple screens displaying waveform analysis and translation algorithms. The golden-streaked cub, the first young Varrock to approach Lyra, about the size of a large dog, with beautiful golden markings through its chitinous armor. It positions itself as a bridge between Lyra and its people, sitting beside her on the smooth stone ground like a loyal companion in a peaceful garden plaza. The matriarch, an ancient Varrock leader, 4 meters tall with translucent amber carapace and 5 star-arranged eyes. She emerges from the cube and eventually positions herself beside Lyra in a posture of respect, like a tribal elder sitting in council beneath the open sky of Monument Valley, surrounded by the carved monuments of her people's history. The setting combines the majesty of natural wonders, like the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, for the crystalline formations, The vastness of the African savanna at sunset for the open sacred ground, and the technological marvel of places like CERN or the Very Large Array Telescope facility for the alien cube's mysterious presence. All characters find themselves in positions that emphasize the historic nature of this first peaceful contact between species.